Hello and welcome back to the Craft Beer Corner. Thank you for joining us today. For today's episode, we're going to be taking a tour of Japan here and sampling 4 different beers, all of which are quite popular from Japanese breweries. So the first one we're going to try is the Sapporo Brewing Company. Their standard Sapporo, which is a pale lager, that clocks in at 4.7% ABV. Number 2 is the Asahi Brewing Asahi Super Dry. That's a lager brewed with rice that clocks in at 5%. Third is the Kiuchi Brewing Hitachino Nest, which is a red rice ale. This is the highest ABV of the bunch, 7% on that one. And then finally, again from Sapporo Brewing, we're going to try the Sapporo Light, another one brewed with rice, and this one comes in at 3.9% ABV. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump straight into the Sapporo. Okay, so the very first beer is the Sapporo Premium Beer. It says so right on the can, that's how you know it's true. This is a standard pale lager, very common style in Japan. It's essentially, you can think of it as a Japanese take on the classic American pale lager. So let's go ahead and get this cracked open, get this poured into the glass. You can already see as I'm pouring it, I mean, this looks like most of your standard big brand American beer. Only it's Japanese. Reminiscent of, say, Budweiser, Miller, Coors, any of those. Perhaps it has a little more depth of color, but it's got the very quintessential American lager style head as it pours. Let's take a sniff. In fact, just by the aroma alone, you would be hard-pressed to know that this was Japanese if you hadn't seen it poured from this can. Let's go ahead and give this a sip, see what we think. Evidently looks can be deceiving. This is actually quite different than the average American pale lager, if you will. It's got a lot more depth of character and absolutely, I don't want to say it's bitter because it's not, but it has a much bigger bitter bite. I'm not sure what hops they may use or in what quantity in here, but yeah, it definitely has a much more bitter bite on the front of it than your average American pale lager, which is a good thing. This actually has a pronounced depth of flavor. Out of the gate, you get, I don't want to say it tastes of rice. It doesn't really taste of rice, but if you've had enough rice beers, you can tell beers that are brewed with it. And this definitely tastes like that. It's actually got some rather bright and floral and citrusy notes, almost like a little lemony, but not lemon. And it mixes with almost like a fresh mowed grass and just like this hoppy, lingering bitterness, but it's very subtle and it's got this nice earthiness to it, but it's very refreshing. If I had to categorize this and compare it, the most comparable beer I could think of is a classic German Pilsner, perhaps a Warsteiner or a Bitburger. It reminds me a lot more of your classic German style beer than it does American. Even though, you know, a lot of people think of these as like Japanese big 3 replacements. It's absolutely not. This does not taste like mass market cheap ingredient beer. This tastes quality, and I mean, if you blindfolded me, I would be hard pressed to not suspect this was either Czech or German. This is very good beer. I'm gonna get it a full rating at the end, but so far, great start. Let's go ahead and move on to number 2, the Asahi Super Dry, which is another lager brewed with rice. Okay, so for our next beer we're going to sample here, we have the Asahi Brewing Asahi Super Dry. This is hugely popular in Japan, and certainly it is one of the more popular beers out of Japan. It is brewed with rice, it is a lager, and as we said prior, it is 5% ABV. So let's go ahead and get this poured in the glass so we can see why this beer is so popular. All right. As I'm pouring it here, I can see it is not dissimilar in color from the Sapporo, which we sampled first. It looks remarkably similar. The head is forming pretty much in an identical manner. Classic lager head. It's got very tight bubbles and it's very effervescent. You can see them flowing in here. Nice, beautiful golden color. Let's go ahead and give it a sniff. I can tell you right away, this does not have really a pronounced nose at all. I can just get a hint of any aroma at all, even really breathing deeply. Sticking my nose right down in the glass, I'm just not getting much. There's not much in the way of an aroma, so it's kind of hard to tell what you're going to get, I guess, until you sip it. But let's go ahead and give it a sip and see what this is about. Okay, so this is completely different from the Sapporo, their standard normal premium pale lager. This is indeed dry. I wouldn't say it's super dry. It's not on the level of a brut, but it's definitely dry. It's got a very, very dry finish, and it's actually not what I expected. I'm gonna take another sip so I can really think on it. It's more complex than it lets on. Okay, up front, out of the gate, it's not dissimilar from the Sapporo. You get for a split second these kind of fruity and grass kind of notes, and then it immediately turns tail, completely upend on its head, kind of the expectation. This does not taste German at all. This actually tastes more akin to, I hesitate to say it, but it reminds me a lot of a finish on a lot of American craft beers, notably Goses and Saisons, though it's not sour at all. It's not bitter. It's got a hint of a bite. I'd say it's balanced, but it does have this very distinct bread and bread crust and very kind of baked good finish to it that kind of layers. So up front, you get up front, you get that light, bright fruitiness. Then within the first few seconds, that dissipates. You get hit with just a twinge of bitters, but it's very mellow. Even more mellow than, say, Fuggles, like the classic English bittering hop. It's very mild. But then you get these layers of complexity that really, it's baked goods. It's toast, it's buttered toast, it's bread crust, crumbs, biscuits. That's how this finishes. And it's dry, but it's not super dry. So it doesn't leave your mouth craving water or anything. This is a very enjoyable beer. I'm sure I've had this at some point in the past, but I've had thousands of beers. It's hard to keep them all straight. It's been a long time since I've had Asahi. This is a really good beer. It's not what I expected. And I could see why this is hugely popular. It's interesting in terms of the Japanese brewed with rice style lagers. It's definitely set itself apart. I'm not sure what else is in its malt bill. I'm gonna do a little research, see what I can find out. It might give me inspiration for a nice homebrew recipe. But this is a good beer. I'll get it a full ranking at the end, but let's go ahead and move on to the next one. The big ABV of the bunch, the Kiuchi Brewing Hitachino Nest, which is a red rice ale, clocking in at 7%. Okay, so for our next beer we're going to be testing, it's the Kiuchi Brewing Hitachino Nest, which is billed as a red rice ale. This is the highest ABV of the bunch today, clocking in at 7%. So let's go ahead and get this poured in the glass. Take a look at it, take a sniff of it. experience all the glory that is the beer. Already out of the gate, you can, hopefully this is getting picked up on the camera. This is a much, much darker beer than the two prior. The two prior looked like your standard big three, big four American, you know, cheap, classic American beer. This is very dark. This is reminiscent of an amber ale, and it's actually slightly occluded. It's not dissimilar to, say, a New England style IPA. It's got some cloudiness to it, got a little haze. Let's give it a sniff. It smells good, I'll tell you that. It smells good, and I can smell it out of the gate. It smells, trying to think what it reminds me of. It smells like a cross between an IPA and maybe a Bock, like a big German Bock. That's what it smells like. So let's go ahead and take our first sip. You can see the head's already dissipating a little bit, but it's got a little substance, really tight bubble, so it's still hanging in there. Let's see what this is about. Oh, okay, wow. Oh, wow. Layer upon layer. This is completely different compared to the prior two beers. Wow, this is really complex. I am very pleasantly surprised by this beer. I did not expect that at all. The first sip, it tastes, you get this slight sweetness, and then it just kind of opens up to a layer upon layer upon layer. It's almost as complex as like drinking a Belgian double or a Belgian triple or even a Belgian quad. It is really that layered. Now, it's not as boozy, it doesn't taste boozy, and it doesn't give that warming sensation like you get from a big Belgian Trappist style ale, but this is incredibly complex. I did not expect that. And it's got this really, really nice sweetness to it, which is rare in a beer, to be honest. I'm going to have another sip and think on this. Yeah, I tell you, the more I have of this, the more I like it. And it comes in very slowly. You get plums and grapes and raisins and apricots. I mean, it really is as complex as a Belgian Trappist ale. It truly is. You put this side by side, blindfold taste test. You could probably fool some people into believing this was a Belgian double or even a Belgian triple. The color might give it away just a little bit, but this is a seriously, seriously good beer. This, I expect, is going to be the surprise of the day. I can't wait to get through and go do my full review on this to see how the points stack up, because this is excellent. Anyway, enough lauding of praise on the onto the Hitachino nest. Let's go ahead and move on to our final beer of the day, the Sapporo Light, which is the light version of the first beer that we did a review of prior. Okay, so for our final beer, we're going to be returning back to the Sapporo Brewing, their light version of their pale lager. So this is brewed with rice. It's just a light version. This is Sapporo Light. So let's go ahead, get this poured in. As I'm pouring it, yeah, you can absolutely tell this is lighter. This is certainly the lightest of the bunch. Clocks in at only 3.9, so this is kind of a Japanese take on an American light adjunct lager. Not much in the way of a head. I probably poured it poorly because I can see the bubbles are tight, but you know, it's holding enough and it's holding to the edge of the glass. You don't want a super foamy head on this style of beer anyway. Let's give it a sniff. Now I can tell you out of the gate, this does not smell like your classic American big three light beer at all. The rice really does impart something different and special in this. And I believe some of the big American three that most people know, you know, cheap beer, does have adjunct ingredients like rice. But I would be willing to bet, without having done any research, that they use really high quality rice in the beers over here. It doesn't smell dissimilar to say mirin or rice wine, sweet rice wine, if you're familiar with Japanese cooking. It almost gives off that aroma, and it's very clean, and it's distinct, and it's got this slight sweetness and slight fruitiness to it. Let's give it a sip, see what this is about. Okay. So the flavor of this one is exceptionally light. It's not very pronounced. It's very light on the palate. It does have a slight fruitiness without being fruity. And it does have a slight graininess without being overtly grainy. Not dissimilar to a goza, where you get kind of some hints of biscuit and toast, but it's just background. It's just the idea of it without coming through to the forefront. So this is a good beer. As a light beer, you know, perhaps maybe on the calorie side. I haven't done caloric intake research on this at all. Certainly ABV is depressed 3.9, but it's very refreshing. This would be a good summer beer, a good go-to summer beer. This would be absolutely refreshing on a hot summer day, in my opinion. Give it another sip so I can think about it. Yeah, it's got the soul of the regular Sapporo pale lager, their normal standard premium pale lager, but it's a light version. I don't want to say it tastes watered down. That's not entirely accurate. It's just clearly has fewer fermentables in it. The malt bill is smaller, and it results in a lighter beer. But it's very clean, it's very refreshing. Would I make this one of my go-to beers? No, I wouldn't. Do I think it's good as the rest of the beers in this bunch? No, I don't. But I'm not a light beer guy. I like, you know, as many calories as you want to give me for your experiment. I'm a craft beer guy. I don't care about calories. I don't care about ABV. I'm all about the experience. But this is not bad beer. I'm actually reasonably pleasantly surprised with this. I'll do a full review here, and we'll get the ratings on all four and get all those posted so we can see where they stack up on our 100-point scale. Okay, so for the scoring for the 4 Japanese Tour Japan beer sampling, we started with the Sapporo Brewing here, which is their standard premium pale lager, 4.7%. Down the board, aroma was a 5, gave it a wholly average. Taste, certainly above average on the low end, but I gave it a 7 out of 10. Body, I gave it a 5. Again, it was just average. I kind of expected it might be a little bit heavier, but brewed with rice, you never know. The mouthfeel was actually one of the lower quantifying scores in there. I gave it a 4. It was on the low end of average. The finish was very nice, actually. This was a complex beer that had a lot of layers to it. I gave that a 7 out of 10. The head and the retention, high end of average, I gave that a 6. The appearance, again, you know, kind of what you expect, but I gave it high end of average, another 6 out of 10. Balance, it was a well-balanced beer. You know, is this the best beer I ever had? No. Is it bad beer? Absolutely not. Again, high end of average, I gave it a 6. The feeling in the intangible, you know, how did this beer make me feel? Is that intangible? You can't quantify it really, but I gave it a 7 out of 10. It was above average. I actually really enjoyed this beer, much more than I thought that I would. Finally, as an example of the style as a Japanese pale lager, I thought it was good. It's not great, it's not bad, but it's good. High end of average, I gave it a 6. That brings the grand total score for Sapporo Premium Lager to a 59 out of 100. On to number 2, the Asahi Super Dry, very popular beer, 5% ABV. For the aroma, this is where it let me down. Out of the gate, I didn't expect much because, I mean, there was not much to really even pick up on the nose. 2 out of 10, it was below average there. But as soon as we move into the taste, that's where it turned in a whole different ballgame. Above average, 7 out of 10. Really interesting beer. I actually really enjoyed it. The body was actually more substantial than I would expect, especially as it's super dry or a brute, if you wish. 6 out of 10. High end of average. The mouthfeel, this was above average. I gave that a 7 out of 10. Finish, the same thing. It had a lot of layers as we went through it, and it was a very interesting beer. I gave that a 7 out of 10. The head and the retention on this was quite nice, certainly for the style. It was there, nice tight bubbles, and it didn't completely dissipate. Gave that an 8 out of 10. That was above average. The appearance, you know, it looks fine. Not great, not bad, fine, average. Gave it a 5 out of 10. For the balance, this is, again, I thought this was certainly above average. It was a very, very well-balanced beer in my opinion. Had a whole lot of layering and nothing really overpowered the other, and it was an interesting beer to experience from start to finish. Gave that a 7 out of 10. The feeling and the intangible, I mimicked the balance. I gave it a 7 out of 10. Finally, as an example of the style, is a super dry, rice-based Japanese lager. 7 out of 10. I think it's above average. I can certainly see why this is popular throughout the world. Brings the grand total to 63 out of 100. Moving on to the Kiuchi Brewery's Hitachino Nest. This is their red rice ale. The highest ABV of the bunch, 7%. This was the star of the tour by a landslide. Aroma, I knew it was going to be special just when I smelled it. 7 out of 10. Taste, almost perfection, 9 out of 10. Nothing in this lineup can possibly compete with this beer. Fantastic. The body, boy, was that a nice body. It felt substantial. 7%, you would rather expect it. It's got more fermentables. It's going to have more substance, but 8 out of 10 for the body. Mouthfeel, carbon copy of the body, 8 out of 10. The finish, again, almost perfection, 9 out of 10. It was complex layer upon complex layer upon complex layer. I cannot possibly say enough good things about this beer. I was beyond pleasantly surprised. This was ninja beer. You know, it kind of sneaked in here into this lineup. It's got really interesting artwork on the label. See if I can get a little better look at that. I don't know if the camera's picking it up, but it's got like this little owl on this interesting little background. Very simplistic, but it's nice looking. Very nice beer. The finish we just had, 9 out of 10. The head and retention, above average, 7 out of 10. Appearance, you know, it had a nice amber color. As it was a red rice ale, I expected it would be having a more orangey, reddish amber hue, which it did. It wasn't super pronounced, but above average. I gave it a 7 out of 10 there. The balance, exceptionally well-balanced beer. 9 out of 10, almost perfection. The feeling and the intangible I got, again, 9 out of 10. This is beer nirvana. I cannot recommend this beer enough. If you're interested in Japanese style beers or you happen to like rice base, don't know if you ever had a red rice ale. This is also the only ale of the bunch, but this is fantastic. I would put this up against any Belgian double, triple, quad, any of your standard Trappists. It was that complex and that enjoyable. 9 out of 10 for sure. As an example of style, I give it a perfect 10 out of 10. Never had another red rice Japanese ale to which to compare this, so my personal thoughts on it might be a bit skewed, but I mean, I could not possibly ask for more. Gave that a perfect 10 out of 10. Total score on this one brings it up to 83 out of 100. Absolutely well above average. My opinion is, if you can find this beer, it is worth trying to see if this is something that you like. I really, really enjoyed this one. And our final beer was the Sapporo Brewing Sapporo Light. Again, it's their light version of their standard premium pale lager brewed with rice. This one clocked in at 3.9. I don't know, you know, what to expect. Light version of this, but aroma, it actually was very similar to the standard Sapporo. I gave that a 5 out of 10. The taste, it wasn't anywhere near as substantial. Clearly brewed with fewer fermentables, so there just wasn't as much backbone to it. I give that a 4 out of 10. The body, it was very, very light. It wasn't bad, but it was on the very low end of average. I gave it a 3 out of 10. The mouthfeel, kind of the same thing. Lower mid-range, 4 out of 10. The finish actually was average. I probably expected it would be a little less pronounced given all the other things I experienced up to that point, but I did rate it average of 5 out of 10. The head and retention on there wasn't that great. I might have had a poor pour, but at least even with the bad pour down the middle, if it doesn't foam up, you expect the tight bubbles to at least cling and hold some substance to the side and hold a nice film on the top while you're enjoying the beer. Just didn't happen. 3 out of 10. The appearance, it was very light. I knew it was going to be light going in. 4 out of 10, low end of average. Balance, again, 4 out of 10. It wasn't bad. It wasn't great. Just kind of mid-range, low end of average, 4 out of 10. The feeling and the intangible I had while I experienced it, though, as a whole package, I said it was average. There were things about it that let me down and things about it that surprised me and things about it I expected. I gave it a standard 5 out of 10, just middle of the road. Finally, as an example of the style, again, I went middle of the road, 5 out of 10. That brings the score to 43. So this is a lower ranked beer. I'll go back and check my math, but I believe this is going to be a 43 as I tally through all the scores I gave it in every category. I will make an amendment and add a comment in the video if I messed up my math. Certainly you can add the numbers together and come up with the correct score yourself. But I believe that's going to wrap us up for today. Ladies and gentlemen, as always, I thank you for joining us. Again, this is a new channel. We're trying to build our subscriber base. We're trying to bring content that we think is going to be entertaining and valuable to, veterans of the craft beer movement and people that are new coming, just trying to figure out where to start, what might be good. Maybe you get a little overwhelmed at all the offerings. This is where you can come and look and see what styles maybe you might be interested in, what might be worth picking up, and what might you want to avoid. But we do thank you very much for checking in today. As always, keep it beer, keep it craft. Cheers. We'll see you on the next one.